Lately, we've been talking a lot about visual effects, but this is a channel about indie rebel self-sufficient filmmaking. So I figured, let's put the visual effects aside for a second and let's talk about cinematography. More specifically, this shot and how I achieved it, and then also how we might be able to achieve it for a cheaper budget with cheaper equipment. So let's jump right in.
So the quick version is this. This is the lighting diagram, and if you want to see a quick behind-the-scenes photo, this is it. If that's all you needed, feel free to move on, but if you want a little bit more of an in-depth explanation, stick around. So here's the shot from the camera view. This is taken on the Ursa Mini Pro. I had a small HD monitor hooked up. I think it was the 502. The 502 actually allows you to take snapshots of what's on the screen. We had the UI readout on the screen, and I was able to snap shots so you can actually see the settings. And if you were wondering what kind of lenses we were shooting on Cooke S4s. And so the basic concept here was I wanted it to be kind of shadowy, obviously dark because it's a night scene, it's a horror film, but I wanted there to be depth as well. So if we just mark this up real quick, you can see the transition here from light into the shadow, and same thing here on this garbage bin. There's a transition from light to shadow, so that adds a little bit more depth. And then also on her leg, there's a transition from light to shadow, kind of divided right down the center facing the camera. Same thing with her face. Now of course she's looking off this way, so you can't really see it, but if she was looking straight at the camera, that's what you would see. And then also you can see a little bit of a backlight on this pole over here. Now the one thing I really like about this shot is the long shadows, and that's why we opted to move the lights off to the right side so that you could see these long shadows streak across frame. Switching over to the lighting diagram, we had two M18s half spot so that they weren't full blast, and they had a little bit more spread when you have a half spot instead of doing a full spot on them, obviously. So we wanted to push out a little bit of light but also create these pools of light. So there would be a beam of light here, it would get a little bit darker, and then another beam of light here, and then the background would catch a little bit of light and then fall into darkness. Now you can see that here, especially on the background there. It's sort of this corrugated metal kind of thing they got going on underneath the screen, and it's actually on the screen too. If you actually zoom in, you can kind of see that corrugated metal there. And we opted to put a green screen up there so we could key it and then put whatever footage we wanted, and we wouldn't have to worry about timing while we were on set. We could just accomplish that later. But back to the corrugated metal on the bottom here, you can see that it kind of catches the light. So on the right side, it sort of has that highlight, especially over here. You can see that it's doing the same thing, obviously, that the trash bin is doing, and we're catching that detail down here. Because it was half spot, it would kind of spill over into the background a little bit, and we had to play with that a little bit just to get the right amount of light level on the background there. So let's just say this was the projector, because this was an actual drive-in theater, so it had a little small building here with the projector projecting onto the screen, so that would probably be somewhere around there. And if we look at the reverse angle here, you can see that that's where that was. That projector is right there shooting behind them and illuminating the screen. Now obviously we had something else on here in this shot, but we had green coming out of the projector so that we could key that later in post.
So funny story, we actually shot at a live drive-in movie theater during business hours. So we actually had to flag the M18s so the light wouldn't spill onto the other screens, because what happens then is that if there's too much light, the audience members actually can't see the movie that they're watching. So we actually had to flag the M18s in order to make sure that the light didn't spill onto the other screens around us.
What we actually had to do was flag these lights off here so that we wouldn't get any light spillage. And plus also for the scene, it also makes sense because we wanted to contain the light. For this one, we just wanted it to go straight this way and not have any spill coming off over here. So like not have any light spilling off this way. We didn't flag it off on this end and this end because we wanted that spill to hit the back wall underneath here, and same thing over here. We wanted to get a little bit more spill over here so that it's not just a completely black streak in here. It's supposed to be this natural kind of horror lighting, but also seem a little bit more natural too. So we didn't flag off on this side so that we can get a little bit more of that spill. So we want to shape the lighting so it creates the desired effect, in this case these shafts of light with long shadows. Up front we also had an Arri SkyPanel 60 just to kind of give a little bit of a front light because it was a little bit too dark, so we wanted a little bit more of a wrap. And if we look at that, that's a pretty long distance. So at a certain point, the Arri SkyPanel just doesn't really do too much, especially when you get back here. The shot was actually of her walking this way and walking to this bin, changing the garbage bag, and then walking to this bin and changing that garbage bag. So while she walked, she was illuminated from the SkyPanel to give it a little bit more wrap from the M18s, so it's not just a harsh transition. We did a front light of the SkyPanel to give that transition into darkness a little bit more of a gradual kind of feel. And then the further she walked away, the less effect that had, which is something you can definitely see in this shot here. I mean, if you look at her jeans, they're pretty stark, the transition here, but that's far enough away where you don't really realize that. And then obviously we had the projector here projecting green, but we made sure that didn't contaminate the shot because then otherwise we would have green kind of spilling off all over the place here.
Projectors are obviously very directional. So we didn't have to worry about any green light spilling onto the set.
Finally, over here, you'll notice that we have some fog tubing. And this was kind of interesting. At the time, I thought that we would have a fog machine here and then another one here, or have someone run back and forth creating the fog. But our special effects guy rigged this tubing so that there was tubing all along the right side. You can kind of see it here. It's like this PVC with holes in it. There'll be holes in it every few feet or every foot or something like that. Out of the holes, the fog would come out. So it would be more of a consistent fog and an even fog rather than have someone running back and forth over here or having two fog machines with a heavy output here and then also another heavy output here. It's more of an evenly dispersed fog because it's going through this tubing. The hope was that it would equally disperse throughout this area. And if we go back to the shot, you can see it here in this corner here especially. So that looked really cool when we were on set, and it looks really great on camera. One final thing to note is that we actually had the camera on a dolly so that we can push in as she's walking toward the screen in the background and while the whole scene is kind of playing out. So we had the camera on a dolly and pushed forward. In the corner here you can see that this is the Arri SkyPanel right here. It's not quite set up yet. It was a 60. They didn't actually have any 30s available at the rental house, so we actually went with the 60s, and they're kind of big and bulky, but I guess it's always good to have more power than less power, right? Especially in a big outdoor scene like this so that we can get some of that front light. So that's the Arri SkyPanel SC60.
So you might be saying, okay, but we all don't have access to M18s. How would we accomplish this on a lower budget? And you can use something like an Aputure 1200D or even a 600D. The 1200D is going to cover your ass a little bit more, so I would recommend going with that one. And if you don't have access to an Arri SkyPanel SC60, you can just go with an Aputure Nova 600, and if you can't get that, then you could probably just go with the 300 and still be set. And if you really need to scale it down, you could probably get a bunch of Amaran lights and just fire them all into a diffusion, and that might work. Or you can get an Aputure 300D and use a rectangular softbox. So that's another option as well.
So as a quick bonus, this is just the reverse angle of this shot. Now you can see the fog in the background and everything. On the camera left side, you can see that we have the light from the M18 hitting her on the side. It's kind of like to the side and the back of her. And then we also had a bounce in the lower right corner here. So we had a bounce over here, and it's returning light onto her face this way. Now if we zoom into her eye, you can see here that this right here, this reflection right here, is the bounce. And the reason why we added the bounce was this is a sample shot of what it looked like without the bounce. So you could really see here that it kind of is a little too contrasty, a little too dark. Ideally, I think what we did was we split the difference between these two. So we split the difference between this and the other one, because this now is brought up quite a bit, but we brought it up because that's a pretty heavy shadow there. Oh, and one other thing to note from this angle, if you zoom into the background here, you can see that that screen is one of the drive-in screens way off behind us in the distance. When I talked about flagging off the lights so that we wouldn't interfere with the projector and the viewing experience of that audience, that's what I'm talking about, because we had screens all around us showing actual movies. And one final thing about white balance, I chose 4000 because I didn't really go into it thinking, yeah, I'm going to use 4000 Kelvin for the color temperature of the scene, but the reason why I did it was because I was playing around with the sliders, and obviously these lights, HMIs, are rated for roughly, 5600, 5800, somewhere around there. I chose to go with 4000 because it gave me sort of like this bluish tone, but not an excessive amount of blue. It's just sort of this cooled off tone that's sort of this halfway between area, so it kind of gives this nighttime bluish look, but it's not too blue, so that's why I went with 4000 Kelvin.
So that's it for this one. If you guys want to see any more lighting breakdowns, let me know in the comments. Once again, this is Paul Del Vecchio, and I'll see you guys next time.
Yeah.